Hello, I'm back. Chapter 19 of Letters from the Lighthouse. At the start of chapter 18, which was called Together, I said I couldn't find a propaganda slogan with that word. I've now found lots. I've just had another look. There were lots that said, it gave another message of something they had to do, and it used the word together a lot. Together we can do this, together we can do that. And there was one poster with just the word together on it, and it was it had like soldiers from all different nations working together to fight our side for us. So it had people from all different races working together. And today's, or this next chapter, chapter 19's title is It's a Full-Time Job to Win. That one I found as a tagline, which is you have your main poster, you've got your main slogan, the main words, and then along the bottom you've got a little extra sentence called a tagline that makes you just think a little bit further. And it was a tagline at the bottom of a poster that said, it's a full-time job to win. Okay, chapter 19, it's a full-time job to win. We now had to get everyone quickly and quietly off the beach. Here, carry those, will you? Miss Carter thrust a bundle of clothes into my arms. We're taking everyone to Queenie's. Torches off. We don't want to attract attention. There were 32 refugees in total. 32 wet, frightened, exhausted people who had travelled through a storm in a sailing boat meant to hold 10. How awful their lives back home must have been to take such a risk. And these weren't fighters or soldiers, but the sort of people you'd walk past every day in the street. Men with grey hair, a girl and her brother holding hands, 2 old ladies whose dripping wet glasses kept sliding down their noses. Baby Reuben, now safely wrapped in his blanket again, back in his mother's arms. But to my growing concern, there was no sign of a pretty 17-year-old girl amongst them. Miss Henderson seemed to be looking for someone too. I've not seen her yet, she was saying to Queenie. I'd recognise her from her picture, I'm sure I would. Following the crowd along the beach, I caught up with Ephraim. He was carrying a bedroll under one arm and a suitcase in the other. Have you seen Zuki? I asked him. She's not here, Olive. He sounded irritated. So she can't be involved, can she? But she must be, I insisted. She had the code. In frustration, he raised his shoulders skywards. I don't know what's happened, all right? A mix-up, an accident. All I know is she's not here, so stop asking. Back at Queenie's, her kitchen was bright and warm and soon very full of people peeling off wet coats and thawing their hands by the fire. It was a completely different room now to how I'd remembered it on our first night here. Something was actually cooking on the stove, and the table was laden with plates, bowls, spoons and loaves of bread. Welcome everyone, Miss Henderson announced, clearing her throat. Or should I say, shalom? Forgive my rusty Hebrew, please. Eat all you can. Shalom, we sing a song called Shalom at school sometimes. It is sort of, it's a greeting, and it's something you say when you're parting with people as well, and it sort of means peace be with you. Thick carrot soup was ladled onto plates and into bowls, and when they ran out, into cups. With each serving, Queenie also gave out envelopes, which people seemed extremely grateful for. They were, Miss Carter told me, fake identity papers. We need it to look official, she explained. On their own papers, these people wouldn't be allowed into our country, sadly. So they're staying here just for a few days? I asked, remembering what Queenie had told me. Well, only until they're strong enough to travel on. We'll try to keep it as low-key as possible, but you know what this place is like. Someone's bound to stick their beak in somehow. Yet the mood in Queenie's kitchen right now was joyful, almost giddy, like that of a birthday tea or a Christmas dinner. We'd been part of something no one had expected to succeed, and against the odds, it had. Yet for me, it felt bittersweet because Zuki wasn't there. So I was glad to be kept busy, slicing bread, offering refills of soup. "Have you heard the news?" Miss Henderson sidled up to Miss Carter, who was next to me, cutting more bread. "Our contact didn't make it onto the boat." I stopped slicing to listen. No, said Miss Henderson quickly, keen to dispel the concern on Miss Carter's face. "We had no reports of a casualty. Apparently, she ran off as the boat was leaving and they couldn't wait. They had to sail without her." Miss Carter looked shocked. "Well, how very odd. I thought Miss Arby was one of the best." Miss Arby. That name again. The contact from London who everyone trusted but no one seemed to have ever met. I watched as Miss Carter threaded her way across the room to break the news to Ephraim and Queenie. Their reactions were similar, a nod and a shake of the head, a look of disbelief, as if they'd expected better from this mysterious Mrs. Arby. After the initial relief, the mood in the room grew quieter, more thoughtful. Some of the refugees had already fallen asleep in their seats. Ephraim's hand-knitted socks warming their feet. Little Reuben was snoring heartily. His mum, a lady called Miriam, let me hold her for a moment, and I marvelled at his tiny pink fingers and the jet-black curls on his head. "He's so little," I murmured. "Isn't he?" Miriam spoke perfect English. "He's only 5 days old, you know." And theirs wasn't the only incredible story. By the fire, a brother and sister, Jacob and Elise, played cards like normal families did, except their parents had been sent to a camp in Poland, and they'd only escaped a similar fate when a sympathetic doctor hid them both by strapping them to the underside of a stretcher and then carrying them into a waiting ambulance. Miss Henderson told me all of this, and it really was quite a lot to take in. We also managed to track down the rightful owner of the waterlogged suitcase, a small dark-haired woman called Judith. Ephraim said he'd go back to the Lighthouse to fetch it for her. I asked him to check on Cliff while he was there. We hit a huge wave yesterday and it fell overboard. She spoke in German, which Queenie translated. It's a miracle it turned up on this beach, a sign we were meant to come here. I wanted to hear more of her story, but by now there was a mountain of washing up to do, and Mrs. Henderson was bustling me towards the sink. "Come, let's make a start on these dishes," she ordered. "I'll wash you dry." The sight of all the dirty plates made me suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. It was the middle of the night after all, but as we worked, we got talking some more about the refugees and I soon forgot to be tired. They were mostly from Austria. Mrs. Henderson told me all Jewish, but for the young woman, a ballerina whose Romany parents had been put in prison by the Nazis. She was called Liaba Zingari, which I thought was a marvellous name, and was trying to get to America to become a famous dancer. "Hitler's persecuting the Roma people too," Miss Henderson explained. "It's dreadful. I often wonder where it'll all end." Amongst the Jews were Mr. Geffen, a concert violinist, a writer called Mr. Krauss, who travelled with his mother, the Schumann family, who made puppets from scrap cloth and string. Their 3 daughters, Rosa, Anna and Mimi, could play just about any musical instrument you could name. "That Mimi Schumann," Miss Henderson pointed a soapy finger at a tall, pale girl with startling green eyes. "She sings like one of God's own angels, so I'm told." The other refugees were librarians, a baker, 3 men who wrote for newspapers, a singer, a shopkeeper, and 2 young women who were teachers, called Fraulein Weber and Frau Berliner. Hearing their stories made me sadder somehow, because these people weren't strangers anymore. They had names, even though I can't pronounce them. They had names, did important jobs, had exciting futures ahead. One of them was only 5 days old. Like the people in that miserable newsreel, they all had yellow badges sewn onto the left breast of their coats. They were star-shaped, and the word Jude written in handwriting clumsier than Clift's. They weren't badges to be proud of like the ones we got at school for good work. Their only purpose, it seemed, was to make sure people knew you were one of those types Hitler loathed. How could these people be made to feel ashamed of who they were? I hadn't thought I could hate the Nazis more than I already did. Now, though, I really understood why Zuki was so distraught at what was happening in Europe. We weren't Jewish, but we were human beings, and that was more than enough reason to be outraged. Look at those 2, Miss Henderson said, nodding in the direction of Esther and her dad. I let out a long breath. It was hard and lovely seeing them nestled against each other, like they fitted somehow. My dad had given me hugs like that too. It was odd and rather comforting to think it was something Esther and me had in common. Miss Henderson handed me another soapy plate. Esther's father's a doctor. He's called Dr. Worth. So is that Esther's real surname? I asked. The Jenkins family, who took her in after the kinder transport, gave her their surname. She didn't expect to see her family again. This was supposed to be a fresh start for her here in England. Her mother, God bless her, was already dead. Her father was in trouble with the authorities. For doing what? Although I had pretty much guessed what the answer was. He was Jewish. It's just so stupid, I said, drying the plate rather roughly. How can you hate someone just because of how they live their life? Miss Henderson sighed. People like to have something to hate. It makes life easier when things go wrong if there's someone to blame. Think about what happened here today with that pilot, Olive. She meant how quickly the crowd had turned on him. It was frightening how easily normal, pleasant people got whipped up into nastiness. The possibility that something similar had happened to Esther's family disturbed me. But it's worse than that, isn't it? I said, thinking. The German pilot, he was a fighter from the enemy side. Esther's family were, well, just people. Yes, my dear. Miss Henderson sighed again, blowing damp strands of hair off her face. Normal, educated, cultured people. It was all very well, the kinder transport, but what good's a child without its parents? You saw what it did to Esther. Well, I'm glad they're all here, I said, and I'm glad you helped them. Miss Henderson looked sad. But we can't save everyone. Our government needs to take some responsibility and do much, much more. We should be helping them flee Hitler, not turning them away. We've had to smuggle these good people in like criminals. That night, Miss Henderson took in 10 refugees. Queenie kept the rest of the post office, where beds were made up on whatever mattresses and chairs could be found. It was daybreak when the house finally quietened down. You look done in, Ephraim said, handing me my coat. I'll finish up here. You go on to bed. The sink was full of dirty plates again, but I was too tired to argue, and I felt bad for leaving Cliff, who I'd barely given a second thought to all night. Before we go on, I just want to talk about a little bit. It's difficult because we've not had the lessons, the history lessons, to go alongside the book. I would get your parents or whoever you live with to talk to you about Hitler's treatment of the Jews. It wasn't just Jews, he treated lots of other groups of people badly as well. But get them to tell you about that so they can tell you as much as you need to know. But it's very easy when we're talking about the Second World War to think of it very black and white. All German people were awful and our enemy, and all British people were brilliant. We were the victors. We were the good people. Nothing's ever quite as black and white as that. Yes, Hitler was absolutely evil, and the things that he did and the way that he got people thinking and believing. But not every German person was bad. Some hid Jewish people to save them from their fate. And certainly the Jewish people hadn't done anything wrong, and yet our government weren't welcoming them with open arms and saying, come here, we'll rescue you, we'll save you from that horrible fate that Hitler has given you. They were being turned away, and so if we wanted to help them, we had to smuggle them in. So our government had bad things about them as well. They weren't saints. Nothing's black and white. Okay, I'll carry on. I don't know where I got to though. After the heat and noise of Queenie's, it was nice just to be outside. It wasn't raining anymore. The storm had passed, leaving the air salt sharp and the gulls shrieking like they did after bad weather. At the sides of the streets, the gutters were full of shingle blown in from the beach. Everything else, cobbles, roof tiles, windows, glistened like it had all been scrubbed clean. It was hard to believe so much had happened in just a few hours. All at once, I felt a bit overcome and started to cry quietly to myself. Olive, someone called. Wait a second, will you? Turning, I saw Miss Carter hurrying down the street. I wiped my face with my hand and smiled wearily. Did I forget my hat? No, she stopped in front of me. Ephraim told me you had an idea that your sister might have been on the boat. I gave a little shrug. I'm sure your sister is a marvellous girl, she said, her hand gentle on my arm. But she's not involved in any of this. She never has been. I welled up again and tried staring at the ground, at Miss Carter's feet in their large, immaculate leather brogues. She's gone missing, though, I murmured dismally. And she had a coded note in her pocket, but no one else seems to know how it got there. Miss Carter sighed patiently. Look, I can see you're upset, and I understand, but you have to be realistic, I'm afraid. Your sister must have disappeared off somewhere else. Did she have a boyfriend, perhaps? Ephraim, I stated. Oh, Miss Carter seemed taken aback. Right, I didn't know. Suki hated Hitler and wanted to help people, and the night she went missing, she did meet a man, but it didn't seem like a boyfriend. Staring at Miss Carter's hair, cut short at the neck, I fell silent. She was tall, wore glasses. It struck me that she could, in the right clothes, from a distance, pass as a man. I mean, she could look like a man. If you weren't looking carefully enough, and if she was a long way off, she might look a little bit like a man. Perhaps she saw the realisation in my face. For suddenly something seemed to click in her brain too, and she narrowed her eyes at my coat. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's impossible. What is?" But she didn't answer. Backing away from me and breaking into a run, she disappeared up the street. Oh, that's the end of the chapter. Oh, intriguing. Okay, that's the end for today. See you next time. Bye-bye.